Man, don't you love horror games? I know I do. Especially zombie games. I mean, come on. Dead Rising 2, Dead Rising 3. Wait, no, I haven't done that one yet. Or have I? But, like zombie games, I'm looking for something fresh. Something with a little more punch. Something a little more visceral. Developed by Striking Distance Studios and published by Krafton, you know, the guys behind PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, the Callisto Protocol is a spiritual successor to the original two Dead Space games. Directed by series veteran Glenn Schofield, who was also responsible for World War II Zombies, which was... yeah... The Callisto Protocol takes what they learned from making Dead Space 1 and 2 and turns it into its own game. Now, I could compare this Dead Space spiritual successor to the original two games, but let's be honest with ourselves. I haven't played Dead Space, or Dead Space 2, so I'm going in blind with this one. But first, a little history lesson. After Visceral Games was sacked by EA, they came together to create a new studio, Sledgehammer Games. Sounds familiar, right? Well, they wanted to make their own spiritual successor to Dead Space, so they decided that the best course of action would be to call up Activision and see if they'd let them work on the Call of Duty series. Activision said, sure, why the hell not? Turn COD into a third-person action-adventure game. And they did. There's a prototype for this version of COD floating around somewhere on their servers. A whole 15 minutes of gameplay. As little as it sounds, it's pretty impressive to think about Sledgehammer's third-person Call of Duty. Then, as they were working on that, Infinity Ward had a falling out with their two founders, and Activision came knocking again. Hey, could you guys work with Infinity Ward on this game?
Like, now?
Yeah, now. Drop the third-person project.
Well, that's a big gamble. We've never made an FPS game.
You'll be fine. And fine they were. They decided to help Infinity Ward on their next game, Modern Warfare 3. The game sold like hotcakes, and now Sledgehammer was brought in to work on their own Call of Duty. I think you guys know where this is going, so we'll skip a little bit. Advanced Warfare comes out, aka the beginning of the dark era of COD. Zombies get added in the DLC, and then World War II was their next game, which Glenn Schofield was in charge of. Schofield still held on to the horror dream when working on World War II Zombies, finally bringing back the Nazi Zombies moniker, promising a horror experience. While it was certainly an experience, Sledgehammer continued to work on Call of Duty, and in 2018, Condrey and Schofield left Sledgehammer Games and started working on their own. This led to Schofield starting his own company, Striking Distance Studios. Work on the Callisto Protocol began in 2019, with the game originally being set in the PUBG universe. However, that was changed, and looking back onto it now, I'm genuinely happy that was the case. Because could you imagine how they'd even tie that into the story of that game? But that's pretty much how we ended up here, another third-person survival horror title. So, how is it? The Callisto Protocol starts you off as a guy named Jacob Lee, who is running his last cargo mission ever, placing you on his ship as you're leaving Black Iron Prison, which is a maximum security prison for the baddest of the bad in the solar system. As you're leaving, you're boarded by a group of terrorists called the Outer Way, which is supposedly responsible for the attack on Europa shown before gameplay starts. They're releasing biological attacks on the planet, killing everyone. As you try to sneak back to the front of the ship, you get caught up with a terrorist and you crash land back onto the prison grounds. From there, you're captured and indoctrinated into the prison with the leader of the terrorists, a girl named Dani Nakamura. This is where Jacob gets his head shaven and the core device put into his neck. This is essentially Callisto's version of the health bar from Dead Space. They really do try to keep what works from that game in here. Anyone who has a brain can see that. This is a cover for the fact that I haven't played Dead Space. So, you're put into a cell and right off the bat, the prison is accosted by biophages, the game's main enemy, and it doesn't start you off with a gun. Instead, the game puts melee at the forefront of the gameplay, teaching you how to dodge and weave between the attacks and use the melee to take out enemies. You also make friends with another guy in the prison named Elias. You and Elias work your way through the prison, where you're on your way to meet up with a hacker in order to escape the prison as it starts to crumble due to the constant fighting with the biophages. Speaking of biophages, let's run over the types you'll come across real quick. The first variety you'll encounter are the grunts. These are the most common and the lowest in the food chain, so to say. They attack you by attempting to cave in your skull and come in three varieties: prisoner, security guard, and fat. Next up are the two annoying types, the parasite and the bloodworm. Parasites are small creepy crawlies that are able to hide inside of containers, jump scaring the hell out of you when you open it. Bloodworms are equally annoying, hiding inside of eggs and jumping out to grapple you once you get within their reach. They're not that hard to take out since you can one-shot their egg and avoid the confrontation entirely. Sadly, I have the spatial awareness of a bag of cement, so I almost got carpal tunnel from the ensuing QuickTime events. the Combustor is probably the most boring enemy of the bunch, as it requires little to no strategy to take out. They just crawl towards you, and if you shoot them once, they explode, with their weak point being their entire body. The next enemy is the opposite of them, the Spider Runner. These guys look like they come straight from the deepest level of hell itself, with their face being made up of 4 human heads. They're also super fast and have the ability to turn invisible. Next up are the Blind. These guys show up once you get to the abandoned mine colony in the late stage of the game. They're essentially normal grunts, but due to how long they've been around in the dark, they've completely adapted their senses to being able to hear better. Luckily, this leaves them completely blind and quite vulnerable to being shanked. Lastly, we've got the Big Mouths. You might recognize them from the 2020 cinematic trailer, which is still so fucking cool, even after all these years. These guys are the beefiest of the bunch, having a high chance to block your attacks and not being able to be stealth kills. A few of the enemies are also able to mutate mid-combat. After they've taken enough damage, they'll sprout tentacles from their chest, and if left unharmed, they'll turn into a much more resilient and deadly adversary. Gameplay-wise, it's a fun game. It's nothing special compared to your other third-person shooters though. WSD to walk, mouse to look, click to swing and whatnot. There's no extra pickups in the game outside of credits and audio logs, as well as any main quest items, ammo, healing items and treasures to sell, like converters and decoders. But what exactly do you have in your arsenal to deal with this variety of flesh-feasting fellows? First off, you've got your trusty melee weapon, the Stun Baton. It's like a real-life baton, but on steroids, as this bad boy has an impact, coming packaged with enough voltage to power a PC capable of running this game. Next up are the firearms. These are split into 2 slots, primary and secondary. In the primary slot, we've got 2 weapons, the TK4 Riot Shotgun and the UGC Special Ops Assault Rifle. The shotgun is quite fun, as it packs quite a meaty punch, allowing you to temporarily stun biophages to allow for follow-up combos. The Assault Rifle is a 3-shot burst rifle, which only becomes accessible to Jacob in the late stages of the game. It also costs a metric fuck ton of credits to upgrade, and thus, I didn't use it. You'd need to turn Jacob into the Wolf of Black Iron to max it out. There's also 3 sidearms in the game to choose from. The first one you'll come across is the BI-55 hand cannon. It acts like a Desert Eagle, and due to the fact you get your hands on it quite early, makes it one of the cheaper and easier weapons to max out, which I would recommend, as a maxed out version of this thing hits like a truck. The second sidearm is the Skunkworks shotgun. It's essentially the riot gun's smaller cousin, as it functions like a sawed-off, has high damage and comes fairly early in the game. But it does have a tiny magazine capacity, at only 2 shells, or 4 if fully upgraded. It's also a lot more expensive to upgrade compared to the BI-55. And lastly, the UGC Tactical Pistol is kind of like a 5.7 from Counter-Strike, except it's burst fire and shit. But hey, its high count magazine size is quite enjoyable until you realize it's essentially the same thing as slapping your enemies in the face with a moist paper towel. And then finally, we have the GRP. The GRP, or the Gravity Restraint Projector, is one of the most fun, most broken things in this game. It's a power glove thing that allows the user to grab onto regular shaped objects and human shaped objects alike. This thing is especially useful if you want to thin out a horde of biophages coming your way, by chucking a few of them into a nearby fan or grinder. It's also a decent way to cheese yourself out of a combat encounter you just can't crack, as it doesn't have a set ammo count. Instead, it has a power bar that continuously depletes when you hold onto an object. This means that if you're quick enough, you can easily dispatch up to half a dozen biophages by merely lifting a few fingers. Literally. Upgrading weapons in the game is all done through the 3D printer terminals you find throughout your adventure, and weapons are used differently compared to your other third-person games. With everything being 3D printed, you can technically hold all of the weapons, but you can only have 2 active at the same time. You can have 2 weapons equipped at once, and if you're able to, you can change them on the fly, but it's risky, as Jacob has to hold out the weapon you're swapping, remove the module from the handle, and slot the new module onto the handle. It's an interesting concept, as it's quicker to switch from one weapon to another, but if you're out of ammo, you'll have to manually change the module that's on your handle to use another one. However, with the melee mechanics, an ammo-less way of dealing damage is also an option. Depending on how much you upgrade your weapon, you'll either deal a lot of damage or none at all. But I would say the upgrades are worth it, as they're not only fun, but also change the gameplay substantially, such as the GRP having a higher battery capacity, the riot gun having a larger magazine size, and the baton straight up taking off an opponent's arm if they happen to block your attack. Try blocking without a fucking limb, dumbass. Anyway, back to the plot. After you make your way out of your cell, wander through the halls, find some bad guys and have a run-in with the head of security, you make your way to the outside by going through some portions of the map. From what I've seen of Dead Space, these kinda match up with some of the other places in the game, showing that the DNA from Dead Space is still inside of Callisto. You also find out the guy who you're helping throughout the beginning, Elias, has a hacker friend who's going to help you escape. You just gotta get him out of the SHU, the prison solitary confinement sector. When you open up the cell, you find out that the friend is none other than Danny. You know, the one person who's the whole reason behind as to why you're stuck here in the first place. She rejects to help you and dips, leaving you and Elias to reconnect at an airlock. During this time you also connect with Elias and get some of his backstory. And then...
Look around. See you on the other side, buddy.
Oh, come the fuck on. Right when things are getting good. Mind you, this is halfway through the game by the way. This game is surprisingly short, lasting only about 10 hours according to howlongtobeat.com. I, however, did it in 9.2. Not to brag, but I'm sure that's some type of record. Elias and Jacob were homies from the start. He really felt like he was the only guy you could trust from the beginning. It feels like right as we were about to get to know each other and become friends with him, he dies, which is a bit of a missed opportunity. From here on out, you work your way through the frozen wastes, killing guys until you make your way to Elias's body. Then, Danny shows up and yoinks his memories so she can escape. You follow Danny through the outside and make your way to a hangar, stopping at your ship on the way, where she finds a case you were shipping. Danny is looking for something, but won't tell you what it is. Apparently, she mistook you for someone else, so she immediately becomes friends with you. From there, you make it to the hangar. Then, as you're trying to escape, the warden shows up and destroys your only means of doing so, sending you down to the depths of the planet. From here, you and your newfound friend have to fight your way through biophages who were already here. Strange. As you continue through the ruins, you find this alien which is the beginning of the biophage outbreak. Apparently, the company that owns the prison has been using it to experiment on humans. Then, the security guard comes back, and this is where you come across the first boss fight in the game. Throughout your adventure, you come across a lot of very spongy enemies, which is kind of the MO for Callisto, but this is the first honest-to-god boss fight, and it's not very good. You just wail on the guy with melee to get him down, and then you shoot to kill him, rinse and repeat, which for one phase would be fine, but there's only one phase. Once he's down, he's done for. You escape the underground and make your way back to the prison where you're knocked out and incarcerated. Danny, during this escape, gets infected with the biophage. You eventually connect with a doctor who tells you that the warden is part of an evil cult and that they're trying to further human evolution with the biophage, as the original Subject Zero has all the power of the mutants, but still remains smart. You can cure Danny of the biophage with the DNA of the Alpha, but you need to find it first. You also get an insight into Danny's memories, showing that her sister was the Europa outbreak where she died. The outbreak was caused by the guys running the prison as a reason to start the Callisto Protocol. That's the title! Which was the go-ahead to make the outbreak happen in the prison. You make your way to the warden's office, where you end up fighting a phase 2 of the boss fight with the head of security. Except the boss fight is just to run around and shoot him until he dies. Nothing else to it. Once you get the DNA, you cure Danny and the warden loses it. He launches the self-destruct and you have to escape, but there's only one escape pod. You give it to Danny, and she leaves with a sample of the outbreak, which she can use to oust the bad guys. Danny's escape also shows that Jacob knew that the bad guys were smuggling the biophage, but Jacob didn't care cause you know, money. With Danny gone and the prison about to get blown sky high, Jacob gives up on life, except the self-destruct is postponed. The doc appears and tells Jacob there's still a way out. And then, the credits. The credits? The game's over? There's still a chapter left to go. Yep, it's over. The game's done. If you want to hear about what happens next, you'll need to buy the DLC. That's right, you'll need to shell out an additional $14 for Final Transmission, the true ending for the $60 AAA release. Boy, I sure love this age of gaming where we get nickel and dimed at every fucking corner. I mean, I still bought it, but only for the purpose of this review. And that doesn't make it any less scummy of the studios behind this game to do so. Final Transmission starts off with a short recap of the main game, which I honestly welcomed with open arms, as it had been close to a year since I played it. Afterwards, we're woken by Dr. Mahler's voice, telling us that there may still be a way for us to escape. The gameplay remains quite simple, as it only took me a few encounters to get the hang of it again. We make it to an elevator, and Jacob asks why he can't remember anything. Mahler tells us it's just some dissociative memory, and we shrug it off before waiting for the next area to render. After collecting a fuse to open the door to Mahler's lab, she tells us that we need to reset a console to open yet another door. We do so by playing this puzzle minigame, and I like it. It's better than yet another fetch quest, I suppose. We finally make it to Mahler's lab and call her on her bullshit. But she tells us that she no longer wants to game herself in the prison due to seeing how good of a person we are. She tells us there's a shuttle with our name on it in the loading bay. She also tells us to collect a bunch of data drives in order to fully expose the Warden's experiments. This DLC focuses a lot more on the psychological part rather than just the horror. As we reach a hallway, reality is seemingly put on loop and falling apart around us, complete with phantom biophages and us finding Eliza's corpse with murderer and give up scribbled all over the wall. There's even a neat bit where we see ourselves opening up a crate, as if everything we're doing is just happening over and over, almost like it's entirely meaningless. We make progress, but not before collecting another fuse. A little later we make it to the super cool visual of the shoe, completely taken over by the rampantly spreading biophage. This DLC really does do a good job of displaying just how dire the situation has gotten on Callisto, as you'll come across every variant of the biophages we fought in the main story, as opposed to them being given their own chapters and segments. The game then seemingly introduces a new enemy type, this grunt that's on fire. But no, this is quite literally the only encounter you have with them. Quick shout out to the art department for this game too, as the next room is just beautiful, with all the particles and such flying around. We then progress, but not before collecting yet another fuse. I then come across Mahler's greatest sin, the Biobot. This horrific creation is part machine, part biophage. We gave it Scullen, but it shatters our beloved baton into pieces. After a bit I find the kinetic hammer, the replacement for the baton, but not before being distracted by this game's beautiful water physics. Seriously, if there is one thing I can wholeheartedly recommend this game for, it's the gorgeous graphics and stellar sound design. YouTube's compression does not do it justice. We immediately take the hammer for a spin against those two Biobots, and yeah, it absolutely kicks ass. This hammer will be your new best friend for the remainder of the DLC, as the Biobots are nigh bulletproof. We take an elevator down and need to collect another 3 fuses. The developers are really dialing it in now, huh? Mahler also tells us that she's waiting on the ship, and then we run into her a minute later. Wait, what? Something's not making sense here. Did the writers also start dialing it in? No time to think though, as we're ambushed by biophages and biobots alike. So, a bit later we've collected all 3 fuses and opened the hatch to the loading bay. While ascending we get to hear a bunch of lines implying a bunch of stuff, before then getting a reiteration of Mahler wanting to stay in the prison.
I played my part in all this as well. There's no escape for me.
After going through a very gooey hallway, we make it to the loading bay? Question mark. No loading bay here though, just an absolute abomination. That's right, Mahler's back with a vengeance after having been yeeted into the trash compactor. And honestly, it's a better boss fight than the one at the end of the game. She then falls to the floor, whereupon we are told by Mahler that there's not much time left. Then we finally make it to the shuttle we're meant to escape on, but Jacob is confused, being able to tell it's the bridge from his ship, the Sharon. But he takes off anyway, as he's in all honesty pretty tired of this multi-day long nightmare. We then fade to white and are faced with the unfortunate reality of our situation, with Mahler giving a final report about the situation.
Final report, Dr. Caitlin Mahler. I found him in the Warden's Tower and dragged him here. His link to Danny's core still active. I used this connection to upload the full details of the experiment. Whether it will be received, I can't say. But it was our only hope to get the truth out there, to turn his sacrifice into opportunity.
Data transfer complete.
Finally. Jacob, you did it. And now, your fight is done.
That's right, bucko, the DLC wasn't real, as Jacob died not long after sending Danny up off the planet. Overall, it's a decent DLC, albeit a little overpriced since it's only 2 hours long. I'm definitely also bummed out about the literal rock pull they perform at the end of the game, though I suppose it is fitting for Jacob to go out like this. At the start of the game, the Warden told us that we would do anything for our survival, regardless of who we have to sacrifice and betray. But instead, Jacob spent his dying breaths fighting with the half of his body that he had left to expose the Warden. Afterwards, the prison collapses, finally killing Mahler and Jacob. A somber end to be sure, but maybe it was naive to think such morally bankrupt characters could get anything but that type of an ending. Overall, Callisto is alright. It's a fine video game, a solid gameplay experience, but it flops so hard on the narrative. It doesn't feel like a cohesive story. What it really feels like is a big checklist of events that happen in an order. Everything is fine on surface level, But if you try to think any deeper or really try to engage in the story, you're hit with roadblock after roadblock that keeps you from being immersed. The game feels unfinished, not in the way of how it runs. Well, if you played it at launch, you'd know that optimization wasn't its strong suit either, but what I truly mean is that the game feels underdeveloped from a story perspective. It feels like crucial puzzle pieces of the game are missing. And while it's lacking in story, it's also lacking in enemy variety. There's no interesting way to dispatch certain enemies. You don't use your whole arsenal, you just throw whatever you have at enemies until they die. In all honesty, there's not much to say about Callisto, because it doesn't do anything revolutionary in terms of gameplay or story. Good graphics though, very pretty. 6 leeches out of 10. So, that'll be all. Thanks for watching to the end of another one of my videos. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe to see more of my stuff, as I have 261 more videos to make between now and the inevitable heat death of the universe. Oh look, it went up this time. Great. Follow me on Twitter, and join me in the Discord. I've been Zanyverse. Till next time.